Good morning and welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council meeting. It is 9:30 on Thursday, October 23rd, 2025. We're here at the California Natural Resources Building in Sacramento, California, and my name is Julie Lee and I'm chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. Next, Emma's going to explain to us how the public can participate in this meeting.
If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment on any agenda item during today's meeting, please send an email blue card to engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov as seen on the screen. Be sure to note a name and the agenda item that you wish to speak on. When called, the clerk will unmute you.
Thanks, Emma. And in accordance with our Bagley-Keene requirements, we will conduct a roll call of the council members to establish a quorum. Emma, can you lead us in our roll call?
Before I begin roll call, I want to note that Vice Chair Miller is absent for this meeting.
Thank you.
Councilmember Burgess.
Here.
Councilmember Weso.
Here.
Councilmember Maranian.
Here.
Councilmember Patterson.
Here.
Councilmember Zingali.
Here.
Chair Lee.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thanks, Emma. All right, our next agenda item is our public comment. This is for items for the public to comment on any topic that is not currently on the council's agenda. So any comments on items on the agenda need to be taken during that time. Emma, do we have any public comments for items not on today's agenda?
We received public comment last week, and those comments are available on the back table and on our website. I do not see any request to comment.
Thank you.
In Sacramento.
Got it.
Councilmember Zingali.
No comments in Eureka either.
Thank you. Thank you, members Zingali. All right, our next item is the consent calendar. We have one item on the consent calendar, which is the adoption of the September 26, 2025 meeting summary. And before we vote, I'll ask if there's any public comments on the items on the consent calendar.
No public comment in Sacramento.
None here.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve these items.
So moved. Second.
All right, the motion forwarded by Member Maranian, seconded by Member Burgess. Emma, can we take a vote?
Councilmember Burgess.
Aye.
Councilmember Weso. Councilmember Maranian.
Aye.
Councilmember Patterson.
Aye.
Councilmember Zingali.
Aye.
Chair Lee.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thanks, Emma. Our next agenda item is the chair's report. As many of you know, I was not here last week, and I want to publicly thank Vice Chair Miller for taking over so I could have a little vacation time with my family, which was lovely. As I've been back, I've been doing a few things, some site visits and tours and different activities. One of the things that I was most excited about last week was going to Lookout Slough. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But first, I also wanted to welcome Ann Patterson, our newest council member. I wasn't here last month to do that, and I just wanted to welcome you publicly. I attended the second day of the Delta Science Program's Adaptive Management Forum. This was our fourth forum that we've held. And as I mentioned, we went to Lookout Slough, and I wanted to share a couple of my impressions of seeing that site. First, the last time I saw that restoration project was right after they had breached the levees, and it just looked basically like dirt and mud. And I saw it from the water side, and so I didn't really get to see the parking lot or some of the things that we had talked about when that appeal had come to us. But this time we were on the land side, so I got to not only see the parking lot, we got to see the kind of the stunning transformation that happened with the 3,400 acre restoration project. And it's just gorgeous. The plant life is vibrant and green, and it really doesn't look like it's been there for that short amount of time. It really looks grown in, filled in. There was lots of wildlife. And we had some great presentations from the engineers that worked on the project, as well as some visual presentations from the Department of Fish and Game that showed us some of the devices that they use to count fish and other things. So that was really super interesting. I think Jessica's going to talk more about the Adaptive Management Forum in her EO report as well. Next week, I'm heading to Oakland for the State of the San Francisco Estuary Conference. I'm looking forward to learning more about how we work in the Bay, how our work in the Bay connects to our work in the Delta. So I'll be reporting about that next month. And next, the National Heritage Area Advisory Meeting also happens to fall next week on the 29th. So we'll be having someone from the council attend that this month instead of myself. And last, I wanted to let everyone know that we're going to be postponing the fall DPIC meeting between the federal government's shutdown and many of our partners being unable to attend. And as we mentioned last week, Amanda Bowl, our previous DPIC coordinator, has been appointed as the new executive director at the Delta Protection Commission. You stole her from me, that's fine. We still get to see her, so I'm excited about that. So we wanted to take some time to regroup, decide if we'll still have time this fall to reschedule or possibly just cancel and focus on an amazing spring gathering. So we'll have more to come on the DPIC gathering as well. So that is basically it for my updates. Do any council members have anything that they'd like to add as an update for anybody? Anything?
I'll just add that from the Delta Protection Commission, we have appointed a new executive director, as you just said, somebody that the Delta Stewardship Council is very familiar with, and we look forward to the wonderful leadership she's bringing to this new agency.
Great. Great. All right. So that's it for my updates. Emma, do we have any public comments on this agenda item?
No public comment in Sacramento, Madam Chair.
None here either. Thank you.
All right. Next, we'll move on to the executive officer's report, and I'll turn it over to Jessica Pearson.
Thank you. Good morning and happy new water year. As you may know, California measures its water starting October 1st each year. So in our By the Numbers update later on, we'll cover a brief look back at water year 2025. Earlier this month, as Chair Lee mentioned, the Delta Science Program hosted the third semi-annual Adaptive Management Forum, and I had the honor of providing some opening remarks and giving a little bit of history as to why the Delta Reform Act emphasizes the adaptive management approach of learning by doing towards Delta management. The two-day event highlighted experts who are practicing adaptive management in water management and ecosystem restoration projects. Presentations featured successes, challenges, and future needs. We had great turnout, and there were a lot of engaging presentations. We had panel discussions and activities that were intended to connect participants from across sectors and disciplines. So day one, we had over 150 attendees, both online and in person. And on day two, the Lookout Slough tour that Chair Lee mentioned, we had 32 participants. I really enjoyed the presentations that we saw there, including the demonstrations of some of the fish counting and monitoring devices. Really great to get out there and see those that massive project, underway and blooming, literally blooming. So that was exciting. The council is looking forward to joining the California Natural Resources Agency Secretary Speaker Series, and that's this Monday, October 27th at 12 o'clock noon via Zoom, where we'll be discussing emerging science on climate change and extreme events like heat waves, wildfires, atmospheric rivers, and droughts, and how they affect the Delta. We'll also discuss how science is informing adaptation planning and strategies to protect Delta communities, agriculture, infrastructure, and biodiversity in coming decades. So if those themes sound familiar, they should. Last month at our council meeting, we talked about the state of Bay Delta science work on extreme events and the September Climate Symposium hosted by the Delta Independent Science Board, which we'll hear more about today. So the council science program and a member of the Independent Science Board and more are going to be part of the panelists for that speaker series. So you can register for the event on the council's website. We have two new certifications of consistency that have been filed with the council since last month's meeting. The Brannon Andrus Levee Maintenance District filed a certification of consistency for the Georgiana Slough Erosion Control and Habitat Enhancement Project. That was on October 8th. This is located on the south bank of Georgiana Slough on Lower Andrus Island near Highway 12 in the Central Delta. Project objectives include providing levee erosion control on approximately 1,500 linear feet of levee, providing fish-friendly habitat on the channel margin, and minimizing long-term maintenance and repair costs. Public review period for the project is open through November 7th. Notably, the Department of Water Resources filed a certification of consistency for the Delta Conveyance Project on October 17th. The proposed project consists of the construction, operation, and maintenance of a new state water project diversion and conveyance facilities in the Delta. Any person has 30 days from October 17th to file an appeal of the certification of consistency. The last day to file an appeal is November 17th. For the public's convenience, the council has a new Delta Conveyance Project website under our Covered Actions tab that provides access to certification of consistency documents. And that information on the website includes a Dropbox link for the certification record. Also, for the public's benefit, I want to mention again that we have updated our website, deltacouncil.ca.gov. The Covered Actions tab is home to the Covered Actions portal, where all certifications of consistency and appeals are submitted and officially filed. There are two new components. We've added an About web page, which is designed to better communicate the Delta Plan's Covered Actions process, including a direct link to a video of staff providing an overview of the certification of consistency and our appeals process. The Covered Actions tab also has the new Delta Conveyance Project website I mentioned, which provides the public quick access to certification documents for that project. Also, in our monthly packet, we continue to produce and update a full list of Delta activities that we are tracking. This is called our active projects list, and that's available also on our website. This month, we also have our quarterly contracts report in your packets, which summarizes the council's contracts for Q3 of the fiscal year. So for questions on anything that I just mentioned, the public can contact engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov. A couple of comment letters this month. The council sent an updated comment letter to the Delta Protection Commission on October 2nd, and this was based on feedback received from councilmember Zingali at our last council meeting to incorporate more inclusive language surrounding the Good Neighbor checklist. Chair Lee also sent a letter on October 16th in response to public comments received by the Delta public agencies on October 13th that were mentioned earlier by our clerk. And all of those copies of letters are available in your packet and on our website. I have three personnel announcements for you this month. Well, one was actually stolen already about Amanda's departure. Just want to also add my congratulations to Amanda. We're so happy for her and this new opportunity, and that we continue to get to work with her. So congratulations, Amanda. Michelle Stern joined the Science Communication and Synthesis Unit of the Delta Science Program. She recently completed a PhD in geography at UC Davis and has been with the U.S. Geological Survey as a hydrologist for over 16 years, working on a variety of projects studying the effects of climate change on hydrology, sediment transport, and nutrients in the Bay Delta and beyond. She brings extensive experience working in interdisciplinary teams and in agency partnerships, which is what we do here, to develop models that inform decisions on a variety of topics. Michelle is going to support data synthesis and modeling initiatives, including the Collaboratory that we've been talking about, which is an initiative where we're bringing together scientists, researchers, and experts to integrate models in order to understand complex systems. So welcome to the council, Michelle. And then Liz Bird joins our team as an IT specialist. She holds a bachelor's degree in cybersecurity and networking. She previously supported small business clients with their IT needs, and she's really eager to apply her technical expertise and problem-solving skills here at the council. For fun, Liz has rollerbladed all over the world, from London to Brazil to Italy. And she's always up for talking about the Sacramento A's or the 49ers. So welcome to Liz. A couple outreach highlights in your packet this month. We saw a variety of topics that attracted attention and engagement on our social media platforms that included Delta Week and California Native American Day, our State of Bay Delta Science, and then recent council appointments. The Independent Science Board's Emerging Climate Science Symposium had 90 in-person and 180 virtual attendees across the two-day event. And so I really think that continues to show the interest in climate science and in the work that the board is doing and how relevant it is. So I'm going to pause there, and then I am going to invite up Audrey Cho, our legislative and policy advisor, to provide a legislative update. We do not have a legal update this month.
Good morning, council members. It's great to be back with you all and officially on staff. So let's go ahead and begin with our legislative update slides, please. Great. So September 13th was the last day for members of the legislature to pass bills. The governor had until 30 days after, on October 13th, to consider and take action concerning the bills on his desk. The legislature will return in January for the second year of a 2-year session. I'm pleased to share that on October 3rd, the governor signed Senate Bill 650, which includes provisions to increase efficiency and clarity in the regulatory and review processes for the council. This includes greater certainty on legal timelines for filing challenges concerning changes to the Delta Plan or appeals procedures, or the council's determination on appeals. Specifically, a 90-day statute of limitations on these challenges will be in place come January. There are also clearer definitions of who can participate in the council's appeals process, explicitly defining state and local public agencies as authorized participants. Lastly, it establishes that the Delta Plan is severable, so that if one part is invalidated by a court, that then doesn't invalidate the plan as a whole. This has been a multi-year effort, and I extend my gratitude to the bill's author, Senator Cabaldon, his staff, and council staff. Now let's dive into other bills that may be of interest that were recently signed. AB 43 by Assemblymember Schultz removes the sunset provisions in the California Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, allowing the Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency to indefinitely protect certain rivers or their segments under certain conditions, like if a river were removed, delisted, or exempted from federal protection. AB 454 by Assemblymember Calra reenacts the California Migratory Bird Treaty Act codified in the Fish and Game Code, which prohibits the take of bird species covered by the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act as of January 1st, 2025, alongside any additional birds that may be designated. This was enacted as an urgency statute and took effect upon signing on October 6th. AB 1319 by Assemblymember Schultz ups safeguards in the event that there is a decrease in endangered or threatened species protections by the federal government by allowing the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to determine whether to provisionally list federally listed species under California's Endangered Species Act through 2031. AB 149 by the Committee on Budget expands provisions and restrictions regarding drassinid mussels, including zebra and quagga mussels, to all invasive mussels. This amends the Harbors and Navigation Code to increase the invasive mussel infestation prevention fee and allows adjustment for inflation. It also appropriates $20 million from the Proposition 4 Climate Bond to be granted to the Department of Fish and Wildlife's invasive mussel infestation work, including their work to address the golden mussel. The bill also states the intent to potentially adjust this fee going forward, so expect to hear more about this bill and golden mussels in the future. AB 764 by Assemblymember Gonzalez. You may recall that I presented on this bill a couple months ago. This allows the take of mute swans as non-game birds by landowners, lessees, or licensed hunters through 2031. Mute swans are a highly invasive species first found in the Sassoon and Napa marshes in 2007. We also have AB 900 by Assemblymember Pappen. This requires the Natural Resources Agency's annual report on progress towards 30 by 30, which is the goal to conserve 30% of the state's lands and coastal waters by 2030, to highlight stewardship progress, needs, and recommendations going forward. Stewardship for the purpose of this section means science-based management, adaptive management, traditional ecological knowledge, and more. Moving on, we have SB 72 by Senator Caballero. This revises the requirements for the contents of the California Water Plan. It sets an interim planning target in the 2028 Water Plan update of an additional 9 million acre feet of water conservation, or storage capacity for 2040. This also requires that a planning target be set by the Department of Water Resources for 2050 as a part of a later update to the water plan. We also have SB 31 by Senator McNerney. This concerns increasing the uses of recycled water and changing recycled water discharge or runoff reporting requirements in specific non-potable applications concerning parks, schools, and food handling and processing facilities. And then lastly, SB 856, multiple provisions here, one of which requires the State Lands Commission to make available a public report of information related to ballast water. Ballast water is water pumped onto ships to maintain stability and safety, but can inadvertently transport invasive species. This new required report must include the volume of ballast water managed and discharged, types of treatment and locations, as well as data on the vessels themselves and inspection and compliance rates. Moving on to the state budget, the 2025 through 2026 state budget provides $19.7 billion from various sources, general, special, bond, federal, for departments overseen by the California Natural Resources Agency and Environmental Protection Agency. This represents 72% of 2024 to 25 spending levels, as there was significant one-time funding incurred last year. The state budget also authorizes $3.5 billion from Proposition 4, just over a third of the $10 billion Safe Drinking Water, Wildfire Protection, Drought Preparedness, and Clean Air Bond Act passed by California voters in 2024. Also authorized were 79.5 new positions across 12 different departments to implement bond-funded programs. Under Prop 4 allocations relevant to the Delta, specifically Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta levies, there's a $150 million allocation under the full bond with the Department of Water Resources as the implementing agency. This should be available for appropriation in 2026 through 27, but is not authorized under the $3.5 billion I just mentioned. Moving on to federal news. Last month, on September 18th, Dr. Andrea Travnicek was confirmed by the Senate as Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the U.S. Department of Interior. Dr. Travnicek was most recently Director of the North Dakota Department of Water Resources and served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of Interior in President Trump's first term. Also confirmed on the same day was Jessica Kramer for Assistant Administrator for the Office of Water at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Prior to her confirmation, Ms. Kramer was a senior advisor to EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin and served as Deputy Secretary of Regulatory Programs at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Lastly, Scott Cameron has been appointed Acting Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation via secretarial order. Mr. Cameron has served as Senior Assistant in the ongoing Colorado River negotiations and was previously serving as Acting Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of Interior. And then lastly, we are on day 23 of a federal shutdown caused by an inability to reach consensus on a continuing resolution or agreement to extend government funding by the last day of the fiscal year, which was September 30th. Appropriations lapsed on October 1st and non-essential operations ceased. This also stalls action on any of the fiscal year 2026 appropriations bills to fund federal agencies and programs. We are tracking these bills and their progress as it relates to funding for programming with federal agencies doing work in the Delta or partnering with us, such as the U.S. Geological Survey, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and Army Corps of Engineers. Also relevant to the federal shutdown is the National Flood Insurance Program, a program managed by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, providing insurance to help reduce the socioeconomic impact of floods. This program's authorization lapsed on October 1st, and during this time is unable to issue new policies, renew policies, or increase coverage. And you'll hear more on this from our new executive fellow, Alec Cruz, later. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
That's great timing for that all to happen about the flood insurance. I'm sure across the country, people are feeling very soothed by that. I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah. Thanks, Diane.
Okay, thank you so much, Audrey. And then next, I'd like to invite up our representatives from the Delta Conservancy and Delta Protection Commission to provide their updates. Welcome to Campbell and Amanda.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Amanda Bull, Executive Director of the Delta Protection Commission. It's very good to be here in this new capacity, and it's really nice to see my former coworkers and colleagues. Very much enjoyed being here for the last decade or so, but also excited about this new opportunity. And really want to thank Supervisor Burgess, Councilmember Burgess, for her leadership over the last several months and kind of helping to steward the Delta Protection Commission, as well as Dan Ray, who stepped in on an interim basis, and then also the staff of the Delta Protection Commission. They've had kind of a wild year, and it's really as I'm on day 4, but in the 4 days I've been there, really impressed with the staff that is there and how committed and passionate they are. So very glad to be there with them. So since this is only day 4, I will have a short update, but did just want to mention a few things. First, I think Dan Ray may have previously mentioned the farmland conversions report that the commission has been working on for several months. We are still working on that, and we really appreciate staff from the Conservancy and the council and the time they've spent in reviewing that, providing us with comments, providing us with additional resources to help us continue to work toward finalizing that. Which is what we are doing right now. We're incorporating all of that, considering recommendations to take to the commission. But given other priorities, this may take a back burner for a little while, but it is still very much a priority of ours, and look forward to presenting a more final document on that, probably first quarter of next year. We have several meetings coming up. As Chair Lee mentioned, the NHA National Heritage Advisory Committee is meeting next week on the 29th at Big Break. We're going to be hearing from our marketing consultants on the development of the tourism branding and marketing plan, and then also discussing the formation of a couple of task forces related to tourism and marketing. And do also want to put out appreciation to Chair Lee and to council staff for participating in the advisory committee as we really start to kind of get this off the ground and really begin to implement the NHA. The Delta Protection Advisory Committee is meeting next on December 2nd. That agenda is not posted yet, but it will be on our website 10 days prior. And then finally, the commission will be meeting twice in November, first on November 3rd and again on November 13th. The November, 3rd meeting notice will be posted tomorrow. And then I was going to thank Dan and everybody again. So again, but I started my presentation with that. So again, excited to be here and very appreciative to everyone who's been stewarding the commission over the last several months, and happy to try to answer any questions anybody has. But again, it's day 4. So thank you.
Okay,
All right.
Campbell, you're up.
Thank you. Good morning. And I too want to welcome Amanda. We look forward to working with you in your new capacity. I think Amanda's the first person to realize the trifecta of having worked for the Conservancy early on, and then the Stewardship Council, and now the Delta Protection Commission. So all 3 Delta agencies. So we, again, really look forward to working with you. Thank you. I want to start, just give you an update on 3 issues here, but I want to start with our Proposition 4. So the legislature allocated our first tranche of funding for Proposition 4. You may recall that the Delta Conservancy received a total of $29 million in total from Prop 4, with the expectation that we would fund equally our nature-based solutions, ecosystem restoration, and community development grant programs. The legislature actually directed us to fund 3 projects: the acquisition of Jersey Island, the restoration of the Bethel Island property that we acquired last year, and then to continue the small farmer rice conversion program. So we're sorting out how we manage that relative to our other priorities. But also the legislature has required that previous bonds have had exemptions to going through the rulemaking process for grant solicitation packages. This bond did not, and the legislature recently approved us going through the emergency rulemaking process. So the expectation is that that's going to take a while. We're still waiting for templates and guidance on how we do that. And our hope is that we would be able to open our solicitation sometime in early 2026. Talk a little bit about Delta funding. It's one of my favorite topics. I think we can all agree that the Delta has not received the funding necessary to try to meet our priorities. It seems to me that California has really lost sight of the significance of the Delta relative to the state, the economy, and all the roles that the Delta plays. So we are, and I think that's really the investments that need to be made are really regardless of whether or not the Delta Conveyance Program moves forward. So we're talking about ecosystem restoration, subsidence reversal, levee maintenance. These needs will persist. We have them now, and they persist into the future regardless of the outcome. So we're trying to coordinate with other entities, relevant groups in the Delta to just try to come together and think strategically about the messages that we need to create to tell the story about the significance of the Delta, and then try to make sure that those messages are getting to the right place at the right time to help realize focus, attention, and hopefully realize more funding for the Delta in the future. We have put out requests to both the PPIC and the Little Hoover Commission to see if this is an issue that they would be willing to take up. And we've not heard anything back from them, but we'll continue to work with them. We are working right now to at the initial stages of trying to put together a block grant to the California Department of Food and Agriculture for their SWEEP program, the State Water Efficiency Enhancement Program. One of the many challenges for Delta farmers is actually pumping water off of the islands. I think we all know that much of the central delta is below sea level. And so it takes a tremendous amount of effort to actually keep water out of the root zone and make agriculture possible. But then just getting that water off the islands. If we didn't pump water off the islands, they literally would fill up and become inland lakes. So it's very, very expensive. One island of about 9,000 acres pays over $350,000 a year in PG&E costs and energy to pump water off the island. So it's an extraordinary cost, and it's just yet another cost for Delta farmers that's making farming in the Delta just really on the verge of not economically viable into the future. So we've reached out to the Department of Fish, Food and Ag, and we're now working with the reclamation districts and the Delta farmers to really identify projects that could move forward if a block grant were to come through the Conservancy. So looking at conversion to solar to reduce cost and reduce carbon footprint, putting in recirculation pumps, working on improvements to the siphons that bring water onto the islands, as well as just maybe replacing old pumps with more efficient new pumps. So our hope is that we'll be able to put together a package and realize some funding through that program to support this effort. And our understanding is that CDFA is in the same boat we are with doing the rulemaking process. So they're expected to open that solicitation probably early next year as well. The last thing I just wanted to mention is that for quite a while now, we have been having conversations about the potential to expand the Delta Conservancy's boundary. If you look at the state of California, you'll see that the Sierra Nevada Conservancy covers the entirety of the Sierra Nevada range. Coastal Conservancy covers the entire coast. We're here in the middle in the Delta in a very small geography, but the remainder of the San Joaquin Valley and the Sacramento Valley really do not have the benefit of conservancy coverage. We've talked a lot up and down the valley about the potential of this, and what we've realized is that it's probably best to start small and look at expanding really into just the remainder of the counties that we already serve. So a great deal of San Joaquin County, the rest of Sacramento County, the rest of Yolo County, and the rest of Solano County. So that would expand our boundary significantly. We want to do this in a way that doesn't create competition for Delta interests. So we would request that future funding would be partitioned, and there would be funding directly identified for Valley programs and funding directly identified for Delta Delta issues. So the hope here really is that through this process, we're just advocating for a larger geography and more funding for underserved areas and really growing the pot. So more funding for the region. And I think we can all recognize that given that we are a watershed, the rest of these counties certainly affects the Delta and how things operate in the Delta. So those are the main topics that I wanted to hit. We do have a new staff member. We have hired Meredith Howard, previously with the Central Valley Water Control Board, to be our new grant program oversight. Meredith comes to us with years and years of experience in developing and managing state programs. So we welcome her. It's also her 5th day on the job, and she's doing great so far. And you may recall that Sarah Lesmeister had her position previously, and Sarah moved on to be the Deputy Executive Officer of the California Water Commission. So with that, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Campbell, can you say again how much from Prop 4 was allocated to the Delta?
To the Delta in its entirety. So there was the 29 million for us. There's the 150 million for the Delta Levy program. So that's about $180 million for sort of levy restoration, economic development, and nature-based solutions. And then I just recently learned that DWR received 150 million to support the restoration of the Legbert Tract. So What's that make total? 180, 280, 330 out of a $10 billion climate bond for really arguably one of the most significant geographies in the state in terms of water management and that water management's connection to California's economy.
Do you know how that compares to other regions like the coast?
Coastal Conservancy received about $1 billion.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we need to work together to highlight our need and realize more funding for the Delta. Thank you.
Kind of an inside joke, but I thought you were going to say that everyone knows your favorite topic is microbial oxidation. He loves to talk about microbial oxidation and subsidence, and he's very good at it.
Got it. At one point, I know we did a list of all of the monetary needs if we were to do everything we needed to do in the Delta. Can you
Yes.
remind me what that total was?
Yeah, thank you
Maybe
so much
it's
for asking. I should have
hundreds
mentioned
of
that.
millions.
So yes, several years ago, we brought together all the agencies and just said, what are your near-term needs? The projects that you've got in the hopper now, the ones you're expecting near-term in the next 10 years. And ultimately what turned out to be 2.4 billion. And that was not quite evenly split, a little heavily, probably would say closer to 1.4 for levee work, and then 1 billion for, again, restoration, nature-based solutions and community development.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions or comments? That was super helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you both. So just looking at the agenda ahead for today, this week is California Flood Preparedness Week. And so we are going to have our lead engineer, Aaron Mullen, and our executive fellow, Alec Cruz, talk about current events to prepare for floods and reduce risk, and a summary of events from the week. Then we are going to have due to the federal government shutdown, you may have noticed that we have an empty chair here at our dais. Our Delta lead scientist, Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers, is unable to be here today. So we are going to have our science deputy, Henry DeBay, who's going to provide us with a brief update on science program activities. And then we have the Delta Independent Science Board Chair, Dr. Inga Werner, and ISB member, Dr. J. Obi-Sakura, or Obi as he goes by. They're going to provide highlights from the September Emerging Climate Science Symposium, as well as current activities of the ISB. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next item.
All right. Anything else from the members? All right. If not, before we move on, I'm going to take public comment on this item. Do we have any, Emma?
No public comment in Sacramento, Madam Chair.
None in Eureka, thank you.
All right, thank you. And go ahead. I think, Jessica, you're going to introduce our next agenda item as well.
Yeah, thank you. So our next item, which is item 7, is flood preparedness, management, and insurance update on recent events. And so as we've discussed in past meetings, the Delta is an inherently flood-prone area. There are miles of engineered levees that really carefully balance protection of Delta residents, properties, agriculture, ecosystems, and recreation sites, and then obviously a water supply for 27 million Californians and agricultural irrigation across the state. So extreme precipitation events, which we know will worsen with climate change, create flooding potential in the Delta. They threaten that critical balance that the levees maintain. And so each October, along with the start of the water year, we observe Flood Preparedness Week. And so this is a statewide effort that's supported by federal, state, and local agencies, and it's designed to educate Californians about flood risks. Delta Reform Act outlines a number of roles for the council in flood preparedness and risk management spaces, alongside our partners at the Central Valley Flood Board and the Department of Water Resources. So today, Aaron Mullen is going to provide an update on some of those activities. And then, as I mentioned, joining Aaron, our new executive fellow, Alec Cruz, is going to discuss recent developments concerning the National Flood Insurance Program. So welcome to Aaron and Alec.
Good morning. As Jessica said, my name is Aaron Mullen, and I'm the lead engineer for the Stewardship Council. And we are going to talk about recent activities related to flood risk. Okay, next slide. All right, to kick us off, I would like to start with a simple refresher about the problem statement and what is at risk. As Jessica mentioned, the Delta is inherently a flood-prone area with approximately 1,000 miles of levees, most of which hold back water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And in addition to that, most of the delta is below sea level, and without the protection provided by these levees, these islands, I say in air quotes, and tracks would be underwater. So the delta has seen about 140 levee breaks since we began reclamation in the 1850s. And the impacts of floods in the delta have far-reaching implications. There's the usual risk to life and property, but the delta also protects the state's water supply and a strained and fragile ecosystem. I like to summarize this with the statement that the co-equal goals are built on levees. And finally, flood recovery is expensive. We heard Campbell mention earlier about how much is estimated. The estimated need for flood risk is 1.4 billion. But to put that in context, if you look at the slide, that's a picture of the Jones Tract flood from it was a sunny day failure back in 2004. The estimates for the recovery for that were 90 million. So that's just one island, one time. And so if you balance the 1.4 billion against what it costs to recover an island, it's actually kind of a good deal. So, all right, next slide. So I'm just going to do a little bit of overview about flood risk in the Delta and what the Delta Reform Act asks the council to do. Okay, so next slide. All right, so the legislature understood that flood risk planning was key to the Delta and weaved this into the Delta Reform Act. The Act expressly states that the Delta Plan must address flood management and levee issues as part of that comprehensive planning. The Act directs the Council to reduce risk to people, property, and state interests in the Delta by promoting effective emergency preparedness, appropriate land uses, and strategic levee investments. Flood risk is so important to the Delta that it's the one area that the Council can act outside of it. The Water Code states that the Delta Plan may identify actions to be taken outside of the Delta if those actions are determined to significantly reduce flood risk in the Delta. And that leads me to my next statement, which I like to say that downstream problems have upstream solutions. So that's one of the themes that I like to bring to flood events, is that the idea that we need to be looking at the water system as a whole, because floodwaters start in the Central Valley and the Delta is really just the bottom of that. Next slide. So this slide, it came out of our vulnerability assessment for our climate change adaptation project, Delta Adapts. It really kind of highlights what's at risk in the Delta. The first box shows the estimated flood risk today. And you can see that this flood risk really increases exponentially over time with climate change, with the increased riverine flows and the and sea level rise. But something that I would like to point out is that the biggest threat is not coming from sea level rise, but from the Delta rivers to the rivers that flow into the Delta from the east. With bigger, warmer storms, it's estimated that the biggest flood risk will come from its tributaries, not from the tides. I'm stressing this because it highlights the need for watershed-wide solutions for Delta flood risk, which, something I already touched on. The other thing that I would like to say about these figures is that it assumes a business as usual scenario. So no levee improvements and no upstream reservoir reoperations. You may have heard about FURO and FloodMAR. So FURO is forecast-informed reservoir operations, and FloodMAR is flood-managed aquifer recharge. Those are a couple of the things that we are investigating. Some of the early results from studies have shown that if we had those in place for the 97 flood event, that we would have seen a reduction of approximately 30% and at Vernalis. So that would be reducing the flows coming into the Delta by 30%. So, I mean, and this is still preliminary information. We're waiting for DWR to produce its reports on that. But I think, that kind of information really highlights the opportunities for the Delta that can be taken upstream. And it's just something that I'm very passionate about. So I know, like I said, I know some of this looks dire, but that doesn't mean that we can't mitigate the risk. And, like I said, through FIRO, through FloodMAR, through emergency response and planning, it doesn't have to end up this way. So next slide. We are going to pivot now to raising awareness. I know that it can seem like everybody knows about the Delta, and this is just one of the most critical things that the state should be paying attention to. But it outside of our colleagues and our workspace, the Delta actually doesn't get as much attention as maybe we think it should. So one of the things that the council staff has really been working on is raising awareness of the Delta's connection to the other state efforts that are going on. So one of the ways that we are working to do this, I'm sorry, next slide. So one of the ways that we are working to do this is participation in the annual Floodplain Management Association Conference, or FMA for short. This organization aims to serve as the leading forum for promoting flood safety and sustainable floodplain practices in California, Nevada, and Hawaii. The annual conference attracts hundreds of engineers, planners, and scientists from all levels of government and industry to share knowledge, foster collaboration, and provide ongoing education. Okay. Next slide. So 2025 was the first year that council staff presented to the FMA conference. I led a panel that I moderated a panel on Delta levy challenges and opportunities. The panel included our partners from DWR, Metropolitan Water District, as well as other local perspectives. I also led the first FMA tour of the Delta. So one of the things so George Booth is the head of FMA, and one of the things he told me when as I was putting this panel together, is that a lot of people that were on this tour may never have actually been to the Delta. So I was really excited to have this opportunity to demonstrate and kind of show FMA goers the Delta and highlight some of the opportunities and the challenges that we face there. Stops included the town of Hood, where we heard from Dan Ray about the National Heritage Area, and we went to Staten Island, where we learned about the Nature Conservancy and their work with the rice growing project. And we finished up on Brandon Island to talk about the 1972 Sunny Day levee failure that created DWR's Delta Levee program. So on this slide is a picture of Isleton taken from the air of that flood, and it was a pretty significant event. Like I said, this levee failure happened in 1972 in June. So it wasn't during a high water event. There wasn't a large rainfall that precipitated it. I think the after action report showed that it was likely caused to human mismanagement. But the consequences of that flood were really dire. It shut off the pumps for 6 weeks. And just for a little bit of context, Clifton Court had only been in operation for 6 years at that point. So it really didn't take a lot of time before the state realized that the Delta was critical. The Delta levees were critical to its water infrastructure system, and that we needed to give it attention. Okay. Next slide. All right. So another piece of outreach that we've conducted included our participation in the Isleton Geologic Hazard Abatement District, or GAD, inaugural open house, and this actually just happened last night. It was held in the historic Clarkburg Schoolhouse in recognition of California's Flood Preparedness Week. As Jessica mentioned, Flood Preparedness Week is an annual event held every October. It happens at the beginning of flood season. So October 1st is the beginning of the water year. It's also the beginning of the flood season. So these two are coupled. The event last night was to engage Delta residents, professionals, and local agencies in discussions about preparedness, community resilience, and new tools available for managing flood risk. I brought information on the council's Delta Adapt project and was able to connect with other flood professionals. One of the highlights for me was getting to see a demonstration of a flood emergency response tool that was commissioned by Sacramento County. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight for this group was that the model utilized work that that council staff created a few years ago for the Delta Adapt's vulnerability assessment in the model. And I just, I'm always so proud when the work that we do lives on through other agencies and in other ways. So the model is still in its draft form, but when it's completed, it will be available to the public and can be used in various flood management and emergency response scenarios. The event also celebrated the purchase of a parametric insurance policy under the IELTS and GAD. And for those of you that are not familiar with parametric insurance, I think it's a little bit of a wonky term. It's a non-traditional insurance product that offers pre-specified payouts based on a trigger event. So if Ileton were to flood, its residents would automatically be eligible for a small payout. And these type of insurance products are really critical for underserved and small communities. If you're familiar with FEMA and how traditional flood insurance works, it can take a really long time for people to see any kind of relief from that process. So a paramedic insurance policy provides a small but instant relief, which really might make the difference for some low-income communities. And so, since we're speaking of insurance, that actually provides a nice little segue to the next topic, which I'm going to hand it over to Alex for. So next slide.
Morning, Council. Today, as Audrey mentioned, I'll be highlighting the National Flood Insurance Program, how it serves the Delta region, what the current federal government shutdown means for residents and local government in the Delta. So for context, the National Flood Insurance Program, which is administered by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, was established in 1968 to provide flood insurance to homeowners, renters, and businesses in communities that adopt and enforce floodplain management regulations. The program aims to shift flood risk from taxpayers to property owners, give access to insurance in flood-prone areas, and encourage communities to reduce flood issues. Within the NFIP sits the community rating system. This is a voluntary incentive program through which communities that go beyond the NFIP's minimum floodplain regulation requirements earn discounts on flood insurance premiums for the residents. For example, communities that earn higher CRS classes, say from a class 9 down to a class 1, can provide premium discounts in anywhere from a 5 to 45% range. Now, the Delta plan emphasizes reducing the state's liability for flood disasters and encouraging greater local resilience, with the community rating system being one performance measure tracked by the Delta Stewardship Council. When local jurisdictions participate in the NFIP and CRS, they strengthen the flood preparedness standing.
Can you use the actual terms instead of the acronyms? Because
yes, Councilmember.
I can't follow all of them, and I do this quite a bit, and I would imagine people from the public don't necessarily know what that all means. And so you're like this is really important. So I appreciate you doing that. But so I know it's harder to put it all out, but the acronyms, sometimes you lose people.
Sure, no worries, completely understood, Councilmember. So when local jurisdictions participate in the National Flood Insurance Program and the community rating system, they strengthen their flood preparedness standing, qualify residents for insurance, and support the overall resilience of this region. So why does this all matter in the Delta? As we know, the region faces significant flood risk from levee failures, river flooding, sea level rise, subsidence, and storm events. However, according to the 2023 Delta Resident Survey, only about 1/3 of Delta residents and about 1/5 of city-dwelling Delta residents have flood insurance. suggesting a major gap in awareness and affordability. The National Flood Insurance Program is facing a serious hurdle right now due to the federal government shutdown. Because the National Flood Insurance Program's authorization lapses with the broader funding lapse, FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management, cannot issue new policies, process renewals or endorsements, and many property transactions that require flood insurance are being delayed or just outright canceled. Existing policies remain in force and claims may still be paid, but the backlog and uncertainty are already having ripple effects, particularly in flood-prone markets, which could be especially significant for the Delta's real estate market, local governments, and residents. As a result, private flood insurance providers have been viewing this as an opportunity to fill a portion of the gap left by the National Flood Insurance Program. Over the past decade, the private flood insurance market has grown due to advances in risk modeling and reinsurance, offering flexible coverage options, yet it's often for significantly higher rates than the National Flood Insurance Program. However, private policies vary widely in scope and reliability, and not all lenders or jurisdictions accept them as NFIP or National Flood Insurance Program equivalent. As always, we'll continue monitoring the situation and keep the council updated with any new developments. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Anyone have questions? Yes, Councilmember Burgess.
Alec, this was a really important presentation. This is the kind of stuff that actually keeps me awake sometimes. With the changes that are going on with FEMA,
Mhm.
with the changes that are happening with our climate, I think about the individuals that live in these prone areas that maybe are older and bought these properties a long time ago when these issues weren't necessarily, maybe an issue, or that we weren't really aware. And they are on limited incomes and they don't have the capacity financially or physically to do the things that they need to do. And then there's also just kind of this assumption that I think a lot of people have, that when we are impacted by a natural disaster, that FEMA will help, or insurance will help, or our government will help. And I really think that there's a really important story to tell about reasonable expectations on those levels. And so, and I also think there's also an importance to talk about personal responsibility when we buy a property or own a property, or we do modifications to a property that is vulnerable. We need to, know what we're doing. And a lot of people move to these more rural areas because it's beautiful, it's open space, and they don't realize that there's a drainage that's a natural system that neighbors share. And in my own district in Contra Costa, we see that, and it's scary. And so I appreciate when we're talking about National Flood Month. National what?
Oh, it's our Flood Preparedness Week.
Flood Preparedness Week. It's really important that people are understanding that there's people out there that don't have the ability to get prepared. And so we need to also help each other. I thought it was really interesting that you talked about how the threat was coming from the water from rivers, because we're having these, high rain events, and we don't have the snowpack that's freezing. It's just all kind of coming through. So when we were talking about, sea level rise, I'm like, why are we talking about flooding? So I thought that was a really important point that you made. And the other question that came up, and you may not know, but there was this recent incident up in Alaska where that whole community was flooded out. And is that the same? Would that be covered by this national flood insurance?
Do you want to answer that?
I know I'm throwing you some kind of, not even the Delta.
No, that's fine. I believe it is, but I can't say with complete certainty. I'd have to look into that and get back to you.
And then the last thing I'll say, Campbell was talking about the amount of money that was put at the Delta, and we're talking about this. This is the area that provides 2/3 of the water supply to the whole state. And why isn't it more of a priority? So thank you. Those are my comments and questions.
Yes, Councilmember Patterson.
I was a little surprised to hear the statistics on the low uptake for flood insurance in the Delta, and I'm wondering if you can help explain. My understanding is, are these not areas where it's required to get a federally backed mortgage? And I guess this first question. The second question is, are we seeing any impact on property transactions at this point for people who are unable to place insurance?
Yeah, to your first question, Councilmember, I'm actually not, well, for our data, typically it's required for property transactions, just as a general requirement. But I can't speak as to these specifics. This is just from the survey data that we received. And then to answer your second question, it's, I'm sorry, remind me of your second question.
Just whether or not there's any evidence that it's impacting property transactions at this point, as people are not able to place insurance.
Generally, yes. Most of the recent news reports, it's really impacting quite a lot of transactions. They're either being significantly delayed with hope that the government reopens or just canceled entirely. But for Delta specifics, we don't have any data on that.
I think also I've been hearing more and more about private insurance stepping in, but it's more expensive and less of a benefit.
And piggybacking, there's a lot of renters, so they wouldn't necessarily. And then there's also kind of the scenario I was talking about, older folks that bought a long time ago that actually own the property and can't afford those high costs of insurance. And so they just can't do it. So, and I don't know what percentage, but I've seen that in my own district.
Councilmember Moranian or Hoy, I think Hoyso. Did you?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Councilmember Hoyso and then Moranian. Thank you.
Yeah, this was a great presentation, and the more I've learned about the Delta, the more I see as the challenges being undaunting. When I look at this page and this one that you provided, you made a comment. You made two comments that the tributaries were more of a risk. Number one, and number two, that the problems were solvable. And when I look at this page, the detail here, just to explain what I'm seeing, today, 2% of the Delta population is at risk for flooding. In 2050, 10% will be. And in 2085, 21% will be. And that suggests to me that this is more related to sea level rise than the tributaries, because I don't see what in this page suggests that the tributaries are going to flood more. Is that more related to river? What do they call them? The rain, the extreme rain events, the atmospheric rivers. Would that be the reason that this? I mean, can we actually predict that though?
I'm so glad you asked that question. This is, what I love explaining this stuff. So it doesn't explicitly state on here where the flood risk is coming from, but it really is from the tributaries. Where our modeling is showing the biggest change is in the San Joaquin system. So as precipitation changes from snow to rain, that's one of the big reasons that we're going to be seeing more flooding from the rivers. So so right now, what it looks like, what we believe is going to be happening is that as the climate heats up and storms get bigger and are able to carry more water, as those clouds come in off of the ocean, they hit the Sierras and then they just drop their water. And especially in the San Joaquin system, the mountains, the Sierra Mountains down there are much taller and steeper than they are in the Sacramento area. So, you think about like Half Dome, think about Yosemite, think about the geography of that area. So when this rain hits the mountain, it just runs off. Oops.
Wow, that was a great effect.
I know, right? I did that on purpose. So the water just runs off. And so we're going to be seeing these really large storm events that are dumping a lot of water on the Sierras, and they're going to be running down through the Cosumnes, through the Merced River, through these tributaries that flow into the San Joaquin River that then flow into the Delta. So where we're seeing some of the biggest risk change is around Stockton and in that area. And that's why if you notice the highly social vulnerable areas changes from, right now we have 3,200 residents that are exposed to flooding, and that is projected to go up to over 70,000. And it's mostly because of the impacts in the San Joaquin system. So yeah, I know it's a little wonky, and it doesn't necessarily, I think it's not intuitive, because we think so much about how climate change is really driving sea level rise, and we don't really, I think not as much a focus has been paid to the changes in our precipitation. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that really helped. And just in the next, just food for thought, because you mentioned there were solutions, and I look toward the future. And when we've done modeling related to how we treat our stormwater, it seems like that modeling is antiquated. It was set up based on activity in the last 100 years, and we're going to forecast what is, to me, enormous changes in our weather and rain patterns, and thereby our flooding patterns. And how do we account for that? How do we, and I know that's probably is just more of a rhetorical question, and maybe you can try to attempt to, but you did make a statement about there are solutions and we can work on them. If the goalpost is moving, if the design of our stormwater systems and our levee systems is based on old information, and we can't keep up with those improvements with today's budgets and today's available funds, how are we going to do that in the future when we really have to redesign our entire system, from our sewers to our levees to our conveyance to our, we're looking at just erosion happening that will compound that.
It's such a critical question. I don't know how we don't do it. I honestly, it's really a matter of political will. And to me, it's so much about getting the story across and communicating the risk, which is, what we're attempting to do by raising Delta awareness. One of the things that one of my passion projects right now is working with our partners at DWR and trying to help them understand that that the work that they're doing has downstream benefits. So, one of the ways forward that I just is so passionate about, and that is so important, is we really need to start tearing down the silos. So, salmon don't understand where the delta stops and where the valley begins. You know, Today's flood water is tomorrow's water supply reliability. It's really all about how we plan and how we implement our infrastructure. And, with the way that we've had things done in the past, the way that we've operated in the past is, people have their little spheres that they're concerned with and that they're in charge of, and they don't necessarily look outside of those spheres. So the way that our system has been set up, it hasn't accounted for the interconnectivity, but that's really the direction that we need to go in, is to be thinking about how the projects that we implement in one area have impacts in another. And I really think there's a lot of potential for that if we're willing to make those changes. And I don't know that we have a choice. So it's really about prioritization, effective communication, and collaboration to, figure out how to advance these projects. And in my mind, that's one of the key roles of the council, is to, really bridge that gap and tell the narrative and get everybody to the table to figure out how to do this.
You have a great way of explaining that, Erin, and I appreciated your clarification about how important our snowpack is and how that's going to be affected by climate change, and that's going to drive some of these flooding events and these increases that we see. Member Maranian?
Yes, this is a very interesting discussion because building infrastructure is a huge thing, and we all deal with it, and we know the complexity of how you build new infrastructure. We were just talking about it specifically in California because of the certain kind of legislation, certain kind of um, social, cultural, environmental issues that have grown over time for good reasons, but at some point it could stop progress because we have a new paradigm and we have a new normal, right? So in my mind, it's like by the time that, so besides the political will, the social awareness, and the budget, there is this whole issue of the process of building. And these are huge infrastructure projects. They're engineered structures, and it takes time in the process of approval, and then the kind of delivery method of how do we build. I mean, the whole idea of build, design, build, progressive design. I mean, these things take years now, and even smaller infrastructures are being hard to build. So it is really a dilemma, and I think social awareness becomes a big issue because we need pressure groups that break these impediments and these roadblocks, and that has to come from the communities. And in a way now, my question though, I mean, this was a very good discussion that went on. I deal with it in my daily life all the time, practicing in infrastructure development space. But my question is, because there's a long way between now and then, and we know that, and we should be aware of it and not be Pollyanna. I think we are tomorrow going to build this big infrastructure that is going to really take care of all the climate change issues. I always think that we are going to continuously have these disasters, and it's the fire, it's the flood, I am concerned that now we know the problem, we somehow know the solutions or some of the solutions, but I always felt like we don't have a roadmap between now and then. So now that you know all this, and we know, and you did this research, and you had the panel, and you talked, is there a way that we can develop blueprints of now, that if this thing happens, this is what is available to you. This is the next few steps you have to take immediate now. And then, of course, the pressure of building new system, and as you know, as Councilman Wesso said, the will, the ability, and the dilemma of building. There's a long way between now and then, and I hope I don't sound dark and negative, but because I know the process, and I know it's not tomorrow, and it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in every infrastructure project you touch. And who would be responsible for doing that? Like, now, these are the, I'm thinking about lately the fires in Southern California, and how people didn't know anything about anything. And they didn't know where to go. They didn't know what FEMA is. They didn't know a lot of them. So I'm thinking that I am worried about in between now, and knowing that, of course, these are the problems and these are the great solutions, and infrastructure is going to be built. Who would be responsible for that? And in this example, what you did, what is your experience? What is the outcome of this? What is the to-do list after all this effort that you made?
That yet again, I'm so glad you asked that question. I think the short and sweet answer is that is what we have put together in our Delta Adapts adaptation plan. In that plan, we outlined several critical threats that the Delta is going to be facing. And we have outlined what measures can be taken to help mitigate and who is responsible for that. We have near-term, midterm, and then long-term solutions. So I think, that's really where council staff is at right now since the Delta Adapts was adopted. We're pivoting from development of that plan to implementation of that plan. And, I look to my council members to help set the leadership for that implementation. I mean, this is what council staff needs from you. So, I mean, I'm just so excited to be able to be here today to talk about this topic because it's so critical. And we need all of us to be pulling together to advance this important work.
Just one point.
Of
I
course.
think this, and I love that boxes that you put how many people are endangered in what they're. these people should get this information somehow, and somebody's got to give this to them. That this is the plan between now and then, and this is what you can do right now if disaster happens.
What
I'm just worried about that we did all these great things and we know about it, and nobody has an idea of these things are out there.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And this is really where, science communication and, social science comes in. And, I've worked for the state for, several for a long time now. And the pivot that we are making, and especially the council, I mean, I worked for DWR before I came to the council, and since we're a relatively new agency, a lot of one of the things I think that really is in our a feather in our cap is our ability to pivot and be innovative. And the adoption of social science and the work that we've been doing there, the outreach to Delta communities, rural communities. I really cannot, if I don't think Morgan is here, but Morgan and Annika have spent a lot of time going out to local events and tabling and trying to raise awareness. And, it's that community building and that communication piece that has maybe not been as strong as it could have been in the past. But I think that, we really understand the importance of getting out there and being on the ground and communicating with community members. And that is one of the things that council staff has spent a lot of time doing.
Yeah, and we should be aware of it. I think Councilman Wessel wanted to add something.
I'm just dying to say something, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add that I really want to thank you for your attitude more than anything else. We really appreciate having somebody like you in that position, because the best shot we have to address this is to have people like you with that passion, that idea of how we can address this. And I just want to thank you for that, because
Well, Erin is a treasure, and I will tell you, having gone on some levy trips with her, if you spend 15 minutes walking around with her, you will learn more about our system than anybody else. And she is definitely my go-to person about that.
She's the difference between having hope and being in all
Yes.
panic.
Well, I just want to
thank
say a couple of
Same
things
here.
about
Same
Delta
here.
Adapt as well, because I think, that document identifies areas where our partners are going to need to implement the plan, right? And so here at the council, we don't have the staff to do that, right? That's not our mission. Our mission is to identify the best available science and point people in the right direction. So I think along the lines of what we were planning for our DPIC meeting, which was going to be very science focused, I agree with you, Erin. I think really getting the word out about Delta Adapts and getting our partners that are involved in DPIC and our other agencies that we work with, really showing them that roadmap. And I think the other part of it is all of that is going to take funding for them. And that has to be, a process. It goes through finance, it goes through the governor's office. There's a big process involved when we do these kinds of things. And so talking to those people and generating support for that type of work and showing them the kind of work that your science-based presentation that you gave us today, that is going to have an impact. This is where we're putting science and we're connecting it to policy. And so that I think is like the most critical thing that we do here at the agency.
And bringing all the partners together.
Bringing all the partners together, so critically important. And I want to stay on this topic for just a minute longer, because I want to give you an opportunity to just talk a little bit about DLIS. We've talked about how much, we need $1.4 billion for levies. What can we do? The levees are sort of the last line of defense after all the water is flowing through all these different, places through the watersheds, and then it all ends up in the Delta as a big old flood. It's the last line of defense, these levees. And, the council passed our delist regulations, and now it's implemented. And we hear from the water resources from DWR on their updates to it and how they're doing. But I think it would be good for you to just sort of mention, like, that is one critical thing that we're doing that actually helps improve those levies, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Before you explain this, I just want to concur with what was said. I think we are all thankful because what you found is the right science and knowledge to begin doing something short-term, mid-term, long-term. And it's now up to everybody and all these organizations, whoever we are, all these groups to come together to make sure that this is put to use and it's being relayed to people who live in these areas.
Yeah,
Thank you. I just
absolutely.
wanted to, yeah,
Okay,
make
so
sure.
yeah, so just to talk about D-list, my favorite subject.
I know.
It's
Aaron's show.
probably the one project I have spent the most time on in my whole career because I was there in 2014 working for DWR on this project. So I brought it from the Department of Water Resources to the council. The real the wonderful part about D-List is, we spent all of this time pulling together, really identifying what state interests in the Delta are, and then defining the risks to those interests and where those risks are at. And now we have a way to collect data and manage and track those risks over time. So in a way, D-List is a little bit like a mega performance measure. So, it is before the council adopted D-List, there really
Delta
was.
levy investment strategy.
Thank you very much.
I was going to jump in and say that, yes.
Okay, yeah. The Delta Levy Investment Strategy, which was, as you said, adopted in 2024. The state of the levies and where the money was going and, what kind of improvements that we saw and our return on investment wasn't something that was tracked. And we didn't have a way of following how well we were doing. And, as you all know, as decision makers, if you don't have the information, you don't have the data, you can't make good choices. So now that we have the Delta Levy Investment Strategy, when we are receiving these reports and we are able to track and monitor where risk is in the Delta and how it changes over time, we can be strategic in how we make these investments, and we can target the areas where the risk is the greatest. So one of the things I think that's a little bit misunderstood about D-List is people think that it's a kind of a do not resuscitate list, that that we have this list where we're saying, oh no, don't improve there, don't make investments there. And that's really not what the project says at all. What it does is it identifies the weakest links and says, these are the areas that need attention. This is how we can go about being strategic and mitigate risk, which is definitely one part of the puzzle. So mitigating risk comes into, and really it's planning before the disaster, and then it's figuring out a way to respond after the disaster. So, like the paramedic insurance policy is really a way to mitigate risk after a flood has come through. And we understand that we can't eliminate risk completely, but we can try and reduce its impacts. I talk, you hear people that say, oh, why did we build in floodplains? Why do people live, behind levees, what have you? And, it's to that, I always say, well, where should they live? Should they live up in the, the foothills or the mountains where the fires are happening? Or should they live in Southern California? Or, we live in a natural world and it's inherently disaster prone. There's going to be things that happen, but we can reduce the impacts to our communities and to the state by being smart and planning ahead and implementing mitigation measures such as stockpiling emergency response materials, understanding, having evacuation routes by reaching out to communities and talking to citizens about what they can do to take care of each other. And so we have so many tools in our tool belt. It's really just a matter of implementing those tools. And just to reiterate on that thing I was saying about earlier about how we really need to break down the silos, and what Jessica said about bringing together our partners. Since the Delta, I really do think of our agency as a bridge. We reach into so many different areas and partnerships and communities and governances. And, that's really our superpower, is our ability to, talk across all of these boundaries and bring people together and bring agencies together. And if you can get everybody identifying the common cause, you're so much more likely to be able to implement it. So, I think, that's my focus moving forward.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks, Alec. That was a great presentation. And of course, Aaron. All right, before we move on, do we have any public comments on this item?
We have no public comment in Sacramento, Madam Chair.
None here, thank you.
All right. Our next up, we have our lead scientist report. This is going to be presented by Henry DeBay, our Deputy Executive Officer for Science. I got finance on the mind now.
Yeah, he wishes.
He wishes, right. Take it away, Henry.
I do like the science. Good morning, Chair, council members. Pleasure to be with you today. I'm filling in, as was mentioned, for our lead scientist, or at least trying to fill in. I was promised no hard questions. So I've got a short presentation for you all today. One, just want to cover some science program updates, which are on the screen now. And also do a brief look back at water year 2025, which ended on September 30th. And then 3, just a quick update on this month's By the Numbers report. So on the screen here are 4 Delta Science Program activities to highlight. So first, back in September, staff took part in the 3rd annual Science Day hosted by the California Council on Science and Technology and the California Natural Resources Agency here in the building. And what's really special about this event is that it's all about connecting state scientists, California state scientists, with California's top-notch universities, labs, research institutions. And Dylan Stern, our council program manager for science funding, presented at the event on the council's Science for Communities project, which is really focused on driving those same connections between state scientists and academia, but also with community-based organizations and tribes. Second, Jessica already mentioned Secretary Crowfoot's speaker series on extreme events, which we're participating in. I wasn't going to say much about this, but given the conversation earlier on floods and flood insurance, I did just want to plug this again. This is an event that's happening online at noon on Monday. And 2 of the presentations are really going to focus on some of these issues. So what is the latest science on atmospheric rivers and floods? And then what's the latest science on wildfires and wildfire impacts? And one of the nice things about, or one of the really interesting things about the wildfire research that's being presented is that California's 8 largest wildfires or mega fires since 2018 have all happened either entirely in the Delta watershed or are straddling the Delta watershed. Okay, so later this month, as Chair Lee mentioned, next week, excuse me, we, along with many others, will be participating and presenting and moderating panels at the State of the Estuary Conference in Oakland. And this is a big science and policy event focused on elevating issues across the San Francisco Bay and Delta. And so this will be another great opportunity to highlight Delta Science Program products and projects. And then finally, next month, in November, we're planning to release a draft update of the Delta Science Plan. So the Delta Science Plan is required in the Delta Plan and really aims to provide a framework and goals for strengthening the doing of science in the Delta. And whether that's doing science more collaboratively or harnessing, emerging new tools. And, especially given the conversation earlier, we really want this science plan to take into consideration the rapid rate of environmental change and how science needs to keep up to better inform decision-making. So the plan's updated every 5 or so years through a very public and collaborative process, and we're looking forward to getting feedback on the draft in the next few weeks. So any questions on that before I move on? All right, not seeing any. Next slide, please. Okay, so water year 2025. So as was mentioned, water years, and maybe this is a reminder for most, but water years start October 1st of every year and then end September 30th. And that's just to align with the natural cycle of precipitation in the state. Next slide. So how much precipitation did California get in water year 2025? And that includes rain, snow, hail, sleet, etc. And the punchline is that the average precipitation for the whole state was 22.83 inches. So that's the dark blue portion of that bar graph. And that number compared to the historical average of 23.72 inches shown by the red line is, well, pretty average. So the average is pretty average. And just for context, so the historical average maximum, which is shown here with the light blue, that maximum was set in 1983. I don't think that was the photo that Erin showed in her presentation. But anyway, the historical average maximum was set in 1983 and was largely associated with a powerful El Nino event, and it led to pretty widespread flooding across the state. Next slide. Thanks. So while the average precipitation for the state was pretty standard, how that precipitation was distributed geographically across the state was not. So Northern California saw more precipitation than usual. So those are the green and yellow cells, sorry, green and blue pixels on the map. And Southern California saw less precipitation than usual. So those are the orange and red pixels. Next slide. Okay, and so here's a graph showing the distribution of precipitation over time by month, and this is a graph just for the northern Sierras. So those are the stations represented by the white dots, if you can see them on the map, but it's a similar picture for the central and southern Sierras. Basically, precipitation in the northern Sierras varied a fair amount relative to the historical average for some months. So for example, November was much wetter than the average, but January was much drier than the historical average. February, again, was much wetter than the average. So some of that variation is obviously normal for California's Mediterranean climate, but I think it's fair to say that baked into some of this is just the increased precipitation variability that we're seeing in a warming climate. So all that to summarize for water year 2025, just remember precipitation for the state as a whole was average, but there was substantial variation geographically and temporally. Next slide. So I'm just going to stop me if you have any questions. I'm going to roll right into the by the numbers report. So this is a snapshot at water year 2026 to date, which again started October 1st. And so far things are looking pretty good. Granted, we're 23 days into the water year. In terms of precipitation, Northern Sierras are at about 87% of the historical average. Central Sierras, 167%, I think that number is. In terms of reservoir storage, things are either at the average or close to the average or above the average. In terms of water temperature, things are pretty standard again across the board, from Clear Creek in the north up near Redding to Collinsville at the confluence of the Sacramento and San Joaquin to Clifton Court Forebay. And then in terms of flow levels, again, pretty normal. The Sacramento River is flowing at 144% of the historical average. And the San Joaquin is doing better than last month, which was at 50% of historical average. So now it's at 75. So that's good, but still not 100. And then diversions from the state and federal pumps are at 111% of the historical average. And then salinity, again, across the board, nothing major to report here. So that concludes the lead scientist report.
I have one question. Could you just do a little look at what are we projecting for the winter again in terms of precipitation or a hard winter? I'm asking this because they had a snippet on the news about the squirrels going crazy and storing all these nuts and how that was a sign of it's going to be a really long, cold, wet winter. So I was just wondering if we could get any scientific perspective on that.
That's a great question. I don't know. Actually, I was reading a blog by UC Davis, the California Watershed Sciences blog, and it's nobody really knows. I mean, we can look ahead a few weeks, but getting that kind of that seasonal level forecasting is extremely challenging. But we do know, based on looking back over the last 30 years, that it's very likely that atmospheric rivers are going to be more extreme. So as the climate warms, the atmosphere can hold more water. And so those atmospheric rivers can really carry a lot of water and dump them on the west coast of the U.S. So, yeah.
What I've learned about that is, I mean, just one or two atmospheric rivers can really make or break California's water supply
And ski
in a
season.
given year.
Yep.
So I don't know. Yeah, maybe we should take note of what the squirrels are doing.
Pay attention to nature. All right, any other questions?
Shirley,
Yes.
Councilmember Zingali has his
Oh, I'm
hand.
sorry, Daniel. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Henry. I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how the variations you talked about in precipitation by geography from month to month, how does that affect just our water health as a state? How does that affect our storage, our conservation, all the strategies that we bring, and just the general, state of water?
I did say no hard questions. So I'll take a crack at this, but don't hold me to it. I mean, as you know, most of the water in the state lands in the northern part of the state and then is conveyed either naturally or through man-made structures to the southern part of the state. So when you look at that map and see that it's wetter in the north and drier in the south, our system is actually set up to be able to support that. So I think if I don't know what it would look like if things were flipped. That would be an interesting thought exercise. But that would be my answer for you.
One of the main effects would be fire season in Southern California. But also that's where the Delta comes in, right? Is because if you can't move the water through the Delta from north to south, then you have challenges.
Correct.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks, Jessica.
Sure.
Well, I love how it really shows how all of California is so connected. And even though a lot of the water ends up in the Delta, it doesn't start there. And I know Lisa Marie gave us a great presentation at one point where she showed the whole cycle of the evaporation from the ocean, dumping the water over the mountains and the snowpack and the runoff. And it's all a big, huge system. And you can't just look at, water in the Delta solely without taking into consideration everything else.
Totally. Yeah, and it still boggles my mind that, a drop of rain can land in Modoc County, up near the border with Oregon and travel all the way down through the Delta and end up coming out of a tap in San Diego. I mean, it's incredible.
It is amazing. All right. Well, thanks, Henry. If anyone else has any questions, all right, we'll go to public comment.
No public comment in Sacramento, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right. Next up, we have the Delta Independent Science Board. So I want to welcome Dr. Inga Warner and Dr. Obey. I'll just keep it short. Welcome. Thank you for attending. It was nice to see you at your meeting yesterday and hear about your perspective on the Climate Change Symposium. So we're looking forward to your presentation. If you guys want to go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julie. Good morning and good morning, council members. We're happy to be here. Our update today will focus on insights from the Emerging Climate Science Symposium, which took place last month at UC Davis. With me here is Dr. Obi Seka. I practiced. So he is the expert, and he actually is the one person who had the idea for the symposium and then led the way together with two of his colleagues, Dr. Anna Michalak and Dr. Lisa Wanger, to lead the effort. And okay, could I have the next slide, please? Yeah, for those of us who don't know us, for those of you who don't know us, we are 10 scientists from across the United States and from different disciplines. We have experience working in other systems, including the Chesapeake Bay and the Everglades. And from myself, I can say I have experience in Europe, Switzerland. Since the last update, we had some changes in the composition of the board. Virginia Dale and Robert Nyman concluded their terms at the end of August. And we have 3 new members, Dr. Steve Lindley, Dr. Kathleen Jones, and Dr. Peter Goodwin. Dr. Lindley and Dr. Jones joined us 1st of September, while Dr. Goodwin started October 1st. So please, the next slide, please. So again, many of you have heard this. The Delta Independent Science Board provides oversight of Delta scientific research, monitoring, and assessment that supports adaptive management, and it generates independent reviews and advice on plans and programs. Next slide. So this is a little bit of background on the symposium that took place in September 16th and 17th in Davis. We had over 250 attendees across 2 days, both virtually and in person. And the primary purpose for what we were trying to do was understand the current climate projections for the region and related uncertainties, and review how the current state of climate science is being integrated into decision-making in the Delta. And Dr. Obisekara is here now, and he will take over from here since he is the expert and not me. So
yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Inga. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, I guess. For me, it's good afternoon here in Florida. I'm very pleased to be here to talk to the council for the first time. And I was pleased to hear the earlier discussion on insurance and flooding, and I felt like these council members know a lot, and I don't have to explain a lot of things. But I will give you a summary of what we heard from the symposium and some of the outcomes. And I think some of the topics may be of interest to you as well. You know, one of the reasons we have this climate symposium is, you know, when we review all these reports coming to us, we realize that science is evolving rapidly. So we need to know the latest on the science. So we realize we need to bring together some scientists who had worked on these topics and hear from them what is the latest science on these topics of interest to the Bay Delta, particularly in terms of the system management and operations and so forth. So if you can go to the next slide. So I think the fact that we had some of the best scientists, some who have worked in the region for decades, and some others who have done a lot of recent work, I think it gave us an opportunity to assemble, you know, what is the future outlook? I think, you know, one of the key messages for me is we need to plan for future conditions. Historically, we have been planning using past climate, but we need to think about future condition. And I must say, you know, working in other parts of the country, particularly in Florida, California is ahead of many states in terms of keeping up with the science and using it. So I apologize if you already know some of these concepts, earlier discussions, from the earlier discussions you had. I realize you probably know many of these effects of warming climate. So I divided the key takeaways into 4 categories. One is the warming trends on the upper left-hand side. Globally, we have had up to about 1.5 degrees Celsius on the average, and California is no different. It has warmed similarly or more even, but more so in inland than on the coast. But you know, where are we heading in terms of a moderate emission scenario? It could go up to 3 degrees Celsius by 2100. And you know, it could be higher, up to probably 5 degrees or so. So this could have significant implications for what we call the atmospheric and hydrologic response. And you already know that. And unfortunately, it's not linear. What I mean by non-linear is that it's accelerating or disproportionately increasing over time as the warming continues. One thing that I heard from you, you have seen many intense rain events lately across the country. We heard about the moisture capacity, or the capacity for the atmosphere to hold moisture under in a warming scenario will increase significantly, and the physics tells us it's about 7% per degree of Celsius. And people, if we don't change anything else, that means all that water could be coming down as rainfall or precipitation, and for every degree Celsius. But I think it's more complicated than that, I'll mention later. So this is more so important for short duration event for stormwater drainage, I think I heard earlier. And I'll come back to it later. So this has significant implications for future climate. The second category is below that, intensifying hydroclimate variability. The variability is obviously going to be increasing. There's no such thing as an average anymore, because what we are going to be expecting is highly volatile and variable climate into the future. We may have lesser number of storms, particularly atmospheric rivers, but those that are occurring will be more intense. I think you heard that from others, in the earlier discussion. And they might bring us a lot of water, but if you can't keep that water in the system, that is also a challenge, and we can think about that later as you go through this discussion. The other aspect is, with the warming, you have more losses from the land or the water bodies. So that means the evaporative demand will increase. So even if the precipitation is not changing, the losses itself may mean less water available or runoff available, coming into the reservoirs and Bay Delta system in general. The other aspect that we heard about was this rapid succession of a flood followed by a drought, what we call flash droughts or flash floods. And this is what is known as a hydroclimate whiplash. In other words, rapid changing from a flood condition to drought condition. And I heard, like I read somewhere in 1862, you had many atmospheric rivers, and immediately followed by that, there was a 2 or 3 year drought. And that is the type of whiplash that we might be seeing in the future. And this is very important for the management of the system itself. On the upper right hand, you see the snowpack, and we already talked about that. The runoff timing and magnitude will change. We'll have less snow, precipitation coming as more rain and less snow in the system. And we also will have rain on snow that will increase the tendency for flashier runoff. We talked about flooding in the tributaries earlier, so that is a sign of things to come. The growing lots of snowpack, that is our natural water storage. I think that is particularly after 2050. That's what the climate models show. So this aspect up to 2050, there might not be bigger differences in scenarios, but after that, there might be larger changes depending on the pathway or emission scenario. So this is something that we should keep in mind. And obviously, with a warmer climate and drier climate, more intense wildfires that we talked about, and that will increase the runoff and sediment delivery. So in other words, the tributary watershed landscape might itself change in the future. The question is, should we incorporate that into our planning ahead in terms of projects? The one that lower right-hand corner, you see as accelerating sea level. We already know about that, and the sea levels has risen about 3 times in the last 30 years or so globally, and even in regionally. And the question is, with the ice sheet melting in Greenland and Antarctica, there might be a tendency for us to get even larger sea level rise, facing the Delta region. And obviously, the rising sea levels will stress the levees that we talked about earlier, increase the salinity intrusion and flood exposure. So this allowed us to give us a, overall, high level picture of what to expect. As I mentioned, there is no middle ground of average. I think the climate will have a climate in California will be more extremes or volatile extremes. And, we've been talking about a lot of uncertainties, but I think we know enough. The science clearly indicates a hotter, drier climate punctuated by intense wet events. I think that is a fact that we could count on and plan for. That means you need more flexible, risk-informed management, focusing on variability and extremes rather than the averages. And that should be the best path forward. Next slide, please. I'll go quickly after this. Sorry, I took a little bit longer for that slide. So we also wanted to know, we have known some of those aspects for some time. Good thing about California is they have done a lot of research up to now. We reviewed all of them, but we wanted to know what did the scientists know during the last 5 to 10 years. What did we learn? One thing we heard that was we have a better skill for forecasting near term, 2 to 3 weeks. Earlier, I think we talked about seasonal forecasting. We are talking about 2 to 3 weeks in advance. And this is very useful for operation of the system. And I'll come back to that later. The other aspect that we know a lot about is the better understanding of rare events, particularly the atmospheric rivers. The more of the water will come from the atmospheric rivers and less from the non-atmospheric river type storms. Okay, that's what we heard in the symposium. The recognition of flash droughts, I mentioned earlier, rapid succession of floods followed by droughts or vice versa, or what we call a whiplash. And then the connection to wildfires. So we have a wildfire right after a drought, and if you have a big flood, the hydrologic response of the watershed will definitely change significantly. We also know a lot about climate models now. The models have improved quite a lot, and they can be used for assessment. But the question is, are they good enough for us to take some definite actions on management and planning? And we also heard there was one case study of potential benefits of using artificial intelligence for projecting runoff. And finally, understanding of timing of transition to low to no snow conditions. We know that the snowpack is decreasing, and there might be a time that you may have very little or no snow in the system. Obviously, and the question is, when would that happen? And I think there have been some studies that it could happen 20 years earlier than previously thought. So there's a lot of research on that we heard about. Next slide, please. So there have been some additional concerns. I don't want to call these uncertainties, but these are the things that we should be working on. One is this, and obviously the ocean temperature regimes, and you probably have heard Pacific decadal oscillation and El Nino, La Nina phenomena. And the climate model told us we are going to have more El Nino-like conditions in the future, but we are finding up to 2025, we have seen more La Nina-like condition. And El Nino, you will have a better, probably warmer conditions in California. But I think, so this sort of apparent disparity in observation is something that needs to be looked at. There have been some papers on that, it could be due to, aerosols coming from Asia and other regions. So that's something that needs to be looked at. The other one is the one that I mentioned earlier, the dynamic versus thermodynamic precipitation. Let me explain that 7% per degree of Celsius, the moisture holding capacity, that's a thermodynamic effect. But the concern is that there might be more storm dynamics happening, that rate of rainfall might be much larger than 7%. In Netherlands, they found the rainfall rate could increase 14% because of the dynamic effects within the storm. Fortunately, around the country, there is a NOAA is looking at what is known as Atlas 15 to look at how does the warming changes future precipitation for stormwater management in particular? And I know one or two of you are engineers, you know this, intensity, duration, frequency curve for stormwater management. The third concern is there seem to be a increasing probability of extreme mega droughts recurring, and the concern is this medieval type or centuries ago extreme droughts. Will there be a higher probability of them happening in the future? I think that's another concern, and that type of drought, when you read about it, it's really significant. The other aspect is the infrastructure vulnerability. I think we talked about looking the system components in isolation. I think we need to look at the system as a whole, but more importantly, cascading impacts of these varying hazards, floods followed by a drought, or even let's say there's after a seismic event, there is let's say a flooding event. What is that cascading effect on the system would be? I think we need to start thinking about doing some scenario analysis of those types of events. And finally, the ecosystem tipping points and forest transitions. So the point here is that the concern is that by mid-century or later, the actual character of the landscape might change. The climatic regime might be more conducive to shrublands type of vegetation. And if there's a forest fire, the forest may not come back as it is now. And that's a significant change in the landscape. And what is the hydrologic response of that type of landscape and the runoff response coming into the, water coming into the reservoir? So that's another aspect that we learned about. Next slide, please. So what are the adaptation strategies that are in place and that could be in place? One is obviously the nature-based solution, the floodplain restoration, forest management. But one thing that we heard about was the headwater restoration. The areas upstream of the reservoirs, there might be opportunities that will help us to mitigate some impacts of the rapid runoff, either rain on snow or rapid runoff situations under future conditions. The one on the upper right, you see a technology integration. This is something that is very attractive and very beneficial, what is known as forecast informed reservoir operation. This increased skill or ability to forecast next to 2 to 3 weeks, that might be very useful in this kind of what we call FIRO or forecast informed reservoir operation. This is something that should be pursued, but there are some challenges. If we have these whiplash events, how do you manage this type of operational, scheme to account for what may come after that, flood situation? Can we store all that water in the system? Do we have to let that water go? So for water supply, so that sequencing of events is important. Another one on the lower left-hand side, what is known as flood MAR, manage aquifer recharge, another very useful concept. It could be to store that extra water in the groundwater. I think these two are, basically forward-looking adaptation strategies. I think the agencies are already using that needs to be pursued further. The adaptive management, I think given that we're going to have more extremes with some uncertainty, we might need more flexible planning, what we call adaptive planning. We talked about, we've been very interested in this decision making under uncertainty, and how do we sequence your projects in a way that account for these tipping points into the future. Instead of looking at one big project up front, can we sequence this project in a way that that account for that uncertainty at what could happen in the future? Next slide, please. So we also had 5 working groups. We had many stakeholders, both online and in person. So we, and the academics and the scientists, we had them look at what are the current needs and what should be done in the future. We're still looking at this data, but we identify 4 things in here that could be very helpful. One is that we need to expand the monitoring networks, particularly the vertical land motion. The reason being that when you have changing conditions and extremes, we need to monitor in real time what's happening. And we need to understand the land subsidence, as we discussed earlier. It could put a lot more stress, on the levee system with the sea level rise. We also need to do more scenario-based planning. In other words, can we look at future scenarios? And the climate modelers, think of this as storyline approach. What if this type of climatic sequence happens? So I think we need to do more of those. Focus on win-win interventions, beneficial even without the climate change. Good example is like, when there's excess water, like the forecast informed reservoir operations or even flood or manage aquifer recharge. Those could be win-win for managing water supply and also flood protection. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, something that may not be considered in depth right now is to look at what can we do about the reservoir system in tributaries, upstream water management as a way of enhancing our natural storage. Next slide, please. So what more could be done? I think I heard this phrase from one of the speakers: manage droughts to get through droughts and vice versa. In other words, this sequencing of rapid onset of one event after another, the whiplash events. Don't focus on average, but focus on extremes. The number 2 is the greater community engagement and co-production of knowledge. In other words, bring the scientists and practitioners together and other stakeholder communities, even the tribal communities. I think bring them together to develop solutions and will help also communicate some of the issues of future conditions that we may experience. Improve cross-agency coordination. I think some agencies have better capacity than others. I think having that kind of cross-agency coordination, I think this collaboratory of modeling, I think it's a good example. We need to bring all of them together to work together. In Florida, we have what is known as Interagency Modeling Center. We bring all the modeling agencies together to develop one model, not multiple models. The other point here is the more integration of compounding risks that I talked about earlier: climate, seismic, subsidence, and so forth. And finally, develop tools with end user focus. Make sure that the output from these tools are useful for all the stakeholders, not one entity in general. Next slide, please. All right, I think I hand over to Inga, or do you want me to cover this?
Oh, I can do it. Always.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a few tasks here. So thank you very much, Obi. I hope everybody found that as interesting as me, even if I heard it a second time. The next steps are that, well, today's presentation, that was a slide from yesterday. I apologize. And then on October 27th, next week, Obi will be giving a presentation in the Secretary Speaker Series, California Natural Resources Agency. And I will present these slides at the State of the Estuary Conference. I'm doing it because nobody else had time, so that's the only reason. And then there will, of course, be additional follow-up. We will be thinking and discussing about what more can be done with the science, how to facilitate thinking more at a system level, and how science is absorbed and integrated into practice. And this will also flow into developing the products from this symposium. There will be a short memo with key highlights of what was learned. There will be a proceedings paper and potentially a perspective piece for peer review publication. Next slide, please. So thank you very much for your attention. if you want to learn more, you can watch the recordings from the symposium. And if you have questions, we can answer them here if we have time, or you can also email to the DISB at deltacouncil.ca.gov. Also, if you have comments, please send them to us. Thanks very much.
Great. And again, Obey, thank you so very much. Yeah, we definitely have time. Do any members want to ask any questions? Yes, Councilmember Burgess.
Thank you, Dr. Warner. And I want to say your name correctly because I have a last name that's said wrong, but were you calling him Obi?
Yeah,
Okay.
you can understand why
That's
they
safe.
call me Obey. Yeah.
I want to thank you for that presentation. The recommendations and the analysis is so far-reaching. I mean, it's in this short amount of time, it doesn't really give the weight of what you're talking about. So I really appreciate the presentation. One of the things that I'm concerned about is the storage of data, the how much we can depend on the monitoring if it's not done correctly. And so I just I hope that within the science community, when we've got AI that can manipulate things, or if storage is not, I just want to make sure that we are maintaining records of all of this data that we're doing. And then the other thing was I read in the staff report the recommendation to do more contaminant monitoring review, and I would be very supportive of that, especially with all of we're in a time of uncertainty in so many different ways, and we don't know what we don't know. So I think that the more we can understand what's going on, that would be really helpful. So I appreciate the presentation.
Can I respond to the first part? Maybe Inga, please can talk about the contaminant monitoring, please.
Yes.
So on the data, I think you made a very good point. We don't want to quote unquote contaminate the data with processed data using AI or some others. So one practice that's happening in a large agency like DWR in Florida is they will keep the raw data as it is, and they keep the process data separately for modeling or other analysis. So the raw data is always preserved, I think, and particularly the Sentinel stations to look at trends and others. But it's also important what you mentioned, the QA/QC of the data collection is important as well. I know the fifth climate assessment, and we heard about way to bring all this climate model data into one place. I think that would be a wonderful opportunity for us to see one data set being used by all agencies and not multiple data sets. And I think that's another opportunity. And we have a similar effort here in Florida and in other parts, I think. So there are many examples of that. And, so.
Yeah, I can maybe say something about, you mentioned the contaminant review. So we are starting with that after, finalizing the prospectus. We are at the stage where we are now scheduling interviews with local experts, and there is a whole list, a big list of them, which also includes folks that were recommended by people who commented on the prospectus. So that's starting. We have the interview questions designed, etc. And yeah, you are absolutely right. The data, how is it collected? What's the QA, QC? Where can it be found? Can it easily be found? That's going to be definitely part of this review because
and protected.
And protected. Oh boy, I don't know if I can get involved in that, but Yeah, definitely. Those are all important questions. I know there has been progress. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know there has been progress with databases, etc., but I'm not informed yet. So we will definitely look at that. Thank you.
All right. Any other members have questions? Yes, Member Patterson.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was incredibly informative. And I just had two quick questions. The first is you noted, I think on one of the slides, that California has warmed rapidly since the 1980s. And I just wondered if you have data, like the actual quantification of that, or if you could point us toward that. And the second, I guess, is maybe less of a question, more of an observation. In one of the prior presentations, talked about kind of the modeling, the projected, the increased risk to communities within the Delta between now and 2050 and later. But I also noted in your slides that reference to accelerating nonlinear atmospheric and hydrological response. And so the concern and perhaps observation is, to what extent can we kind of rely on modeling to really assess how quickly the tributary risk is going to start impacting communities in the San Joaquin area, as we saw before. So just sort of an observation that it seems like perhaps that risk may be uncertain and upon us sooner than we might think. So with those.
Yeah, the first part, I don't have the exact numbers right now, but definitely it's probably the higher of the order of the global average, 1.5 degrees Celsius since the pre-industrial times. But we did hear at the symposium that the inland might be warming more than the coastal lines. Or we can try to get those numbers as well. But I think the second point is very important. One thing, do the models, basically simulate these, observation-based phenomena or even climate model-based phenomena? Because we have these climate models are very coarse. When you look at the cell size of a global climate model is like 100 kilometers sometimes, but they do what is known as downscaling. In other words, bring it down to a smaller, high resolution. Now, they have had a lot of improvements on those. So we really need to look at, there are two types of modeling. One for long-term modeling for water supply type, analysis. The second is more event analysis for stormwater drainage or flooding in communities, right? So that's where the question is, do we have enough information of this intensification of storm events at sub-daily or shorter duration time scale? If you look at, you heard about Alaska, it was more of a storm surge event, but in many parts of the country, I'm seeing these huge storm events in short duration, like in Fort Lauderdale had 20 inches of rainfall in 12 hours, right? So we have this flooding, Texas, like what happened. So I think there is more research is needed. Fortunately, NOAA is doing research. What happens to short duration events? And I know we talked about LA earlier, the stormwater drainage, this is an important aspect. So for localized flooding, I think we need to have the agencies think about what happens at short duration. Should we focus on future conditions that are more intense, that will be characterized by more intense rainfall or not? One last thing I want to mention, I am part of a series of workshops known as codes and standards for future hazards, right? So one thing that I know, nothing will happen until we change the codes and standards. And the codes and standards should be based on future conditions, not the past. And this is what we call non-stationarity in the technical jargon. So the focus should be, whether it's in California or anywhere else in the country, we need to think about future conditions and change the codes and standards. So new projects or retrofitting existing projects need to look at future conditions. That may be uncertain, but we can deal with that uncertainty.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Well, I have one question. Given the many potential improvements and scientific needs that were identified at the symposium. We know that there were many, and we have limited resources. How would you prioritize some of those needs, and why?
Yeah. And this is my thinking. We haven't had a discussion about within the board. We are going to meet November and December, for follow up. My thinking is that, remember, maybe in the next 20, 30 years, there are some things that could be done, because we know beyond 2050 things might be significant. So maybe we need to identify what are those low hanging fruits that we could implement or improve the tools that we have. But at the same time, think about the long term, use these adaptive pathway type strategies. So I think that might be a way to prioritize some of those, uh, you know, recommendations or solutions or suggestions. That's my thinking right now, but we haven't had a discussion in the board about this. That's a good thing to discuss. In fact, somebody commented on develop some solutions for next 20, 30 years and then beyond.
Yeah, I think that would help policymakers a lot if that
Yeah.
level of specificity could come out of the work
Yeah.
that you guys are doing. I think that would be super helpful. And then I guess my last question is, was there a topic or an issue that you hoped would be addressed at the symposium and you weren't able to get to it? I stumped him.
Yeah, you did. I'm trying to think. I think I feel like there is still some gap between the scientists and the practitioners. I was hoping that the practitioners are more in tune to science, the findings that I summarize, and they are making sure that those are being implemented in the tools that they develop or methods. But I must say, DWR and other agencies have done a lot more than other states in the country. I mean, they have what is known as a, weather generator that account for some of these things. But the question is, are we using model data that reflect those general findings, less snowpack, more rain on snow, rapid runoff, those types of things that we know? I think the current feeling is that we should stop talking a lot about uncertainties and then do some things. We know the directions where we are heading. But so I think that gap might be something that needs to be, looked at further, because we didn't have enough time to get to it, I think.
That's a great answer. A little less talk, a little more action. That's
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
cell phone ringtone for my husband.
I have one. I just wanted
Yes,
to,
yes, Maria.
I thought that the current needs and consideration, the way we identified it and what should be done was very good. I wanted to thank you for that. I mean, these are things that are not discussed enough, and you somehow flushed it out and put it out there, and I think people can think about it and act on the basis of it. So thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Inga and Obe, for being with us today. Do we have any public comment on this agenda item, Emma?
Not in Sacramento, Madam Chair.
All right.
Nor in Eureka.
All right. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for having
Bye.
us. Bye-bye.
Our final agenda item is preparation for our next council meeting, which will take place on Thursday, November 20th, here at the CNRA building. We're usually on the fourth Thursday, so I just want to make a note. It's going to be Thanksgiving, so we're a week early, so November 20th. And please refer to the posted meeting notice for further information or updates. And unless we have any other comments, with that, we are adjourned.